Good afternoon. This is CIVE 638, Sedimentation Engineering, and this is class number 092. That's the 9th week, the second class of 2 classes that we teach every week. And I'm Professor Ponce, Victor Ponce with San Diego State University, Department of Civil Engineering. And the content today is the review of the midterm exam. I posed 12 questions, of which the students were supposed to answer 10. And so I'm going to answer, enunciate, tell them what the question was and what the answer is. In my mind, in my book, that's what they say. In my book, this is the answer. So that's it. So that's what we're going to get going here. I have already prepared the content, which I have prepared in here. So I'm expecting you guys to see now the green sheet or the green page. Is that correct? The first question was kind of like a starter question to get you going. What is the specific gravity of a typical sediment particle? This is something, of course, every sedimentation engineer should know by heart. We're dealing with sediment, and sediment has a value of specific gravity, meaning its weight in relation to other elements. So the answer was, you could have just said 265, but most people gave an answer more or less like the answer I'm going to read for you at this time. Quartz and feldspar, which are the main constituents of sediment particles, their specific gravity is generally considered to be about 2.65. Question number 2. Under what circumstance would a sand-sized particle be considered wash load? In here, I was looking for something, but I guess it didn't quite get to most of you guys. I was looking for you guys to say the circumstance would be if you have a gravel river. In a gravel bed river, the sand-sized particles are wash load. That would have been the short answer. If you did that, you would get the full credit. Many of you quite didn't put it that way, and you said what is correct. That is, wash load is the fraction of sediment load whose particle sizes are not significantly represented in the channel bed. I do not believe you, if you didn't mention gravel bed river, I did not, but you did mention the first part, then I did not knock points off your answer. So you're okay either way, one way or the other. Number 3, what is Professor Ponce's friction formula? And what is its main advantage compared to the Manning equation? This is very, as you guys already realize, this concept is very dearly in my heart. I started working with this formula during my PhD dissertation in 1976. So I worked with this formula for exactly 46 years. I think it's a great formula. It is unfortunate that it is not being used in practice. People just simply don't know about it. Even though to derive the Ponce formula, it's not magic. It's not even calculus. It's just algebra, and I've derived it for you. So I really don't know why. The only thing I can say at this point is that people are so hooked up on the Manning equation that they are never going to leave it. The Manning equation, I believe, 1870 or something like that, by Manning. And then popularized by Professor King out of University of Illinois in the early 1900s. I think it was 1910 that he published his Manual of Hydraulics, where he expanded on the Manning equation. And since then, it's been 110 years, and it's out there. People love the Manning equation, even though it is imperfect. But we decided, we were doing a dissertation, and we said we're not going to go there because I had been a student of, obviously, I told you, at Colorado State, and we could not resolve the water surface profiles just with the Manning equation or with the Manning equation. We could not resolve it. It was difficult to resolve, almost impossible. And subsequently, when we introduced the so-called Ponce equation, everything worked out beautifully and perfectly, as a matter of fact. Okay, and why do I call it Ponce equation? Because it's an equation that does not, technically it does not appear in the literature. It only appears wherever I have written papers. So, you know, with a little bit lack of humility, I just call it Ponce equation. Normally, people don't give names to things that they have derived. They wait and expect for other people to come back later and recognize it. In this case, we made an exception. You know, there's several friction formulas. There's 6 or 7 of them with proper names. So that's why we did it. Now, all of you answered this question. Professor Ponce's friction formula is this. Okay. Okay. So all of you did this formula. Actually, I'm going to say that I think one of you did not. Confused it or did partial answer. So he or she probably got 1 or 2 points knocked off from the answer. And you have your exam with you, so you can compare later on your answer to my answer, okay? The second part is, what is its main advantage compared to the Manning equation? Well, point blank, the advantage is this formula is dimensionless, therefore applicable in any system of units, and it simplifies readily. I can't tell you how strongly in favor I am of this equation. It simplified tremendously everything we had said in my hydraulics book, because it came out dimensionless. You don't have to figure out anything else other than the mechanics. We didn't have to fiddle with the dimensionless. I'm sorry, with the dimensions. Okay. Therefore, it clearly and directly links the forces of gravity and friction through a dimensionless number referred to as the Froude number. We already know the origination of the Froude number and so forth. I don't need to dwell on it. Suffice it to say at this point that we now know that Froude did not invent the Froude number. If I haven't discussed this prior to this time, go back and read my book, chapter 5, Origination of the Froude number. Froude was a naval engineer or naval architect. At that time, the people that work with ships were called naval architects, or naval engineering, whatever it is. Don't forget that Froude developed his formula in the year 1875 or 1876. So that's 160 years ago, roughly 40, 50 years ago. But Froude did not develop it. It was later his students, his followers, 30 or 40 years later, out of France and Germany, that were working with a concept that was similar to Froude's, not quite the same, because Froude's originated or involved a horizontal length, while these guys were working with gravity and so forth, and they found out what was supposed to be or get to be the Froude number, and they just called it the Froude number because, for lack of anything else, they wanted to give it a number. They were not the ones that developing it, that they were using it. Actually, they probably were the ones that were developing, because there was no Froude number prior to what they did. So they called it the Froude number, and it stuck. It was about the turn of the century. That's been kind of registered in the literature. So it's about 120 years old. It's a very popular concept. It is part of hydraulics. Everybody knows the Froude number. If you don't know the Froude number, that you don't belong in the field, simply put, okay? How does Professor Ponce's friction equation help justify Jarrett's principle? And here's another issue, that how our equation helps Jarrett's principle. Now, what Jarrett said was fascinating, and I think you guys know already. Jarrett said that, I'm quoting him, he said, I measure hundreds of rivers, actually 100 rivers of all kinds and slopes. And he said that by the time the rivers get to the critical slope, or rather critical regime, when the Froude number approaches 1, in other words, the Froude number can be 0.2, 0.3, 0.4, 0.5, and it keeps going up. By the time it gets to 1, it gets stuck there. It doesn't go up. He was unable to measure any flow in the many flows that he measured as part of the work that he did with the Geological Survey, where the Froude number was greater than 1. So he says it doesn't go up. Mother Nature doesn't like Froude number greater than 1. Okay, and how does that explain? Well, it's explained with our equation. Our equation basically says that if the slope goes up, and the friction goes up, the fruit number doesn't go up. And I think not all of you said that. I think about half of you said that, or we're in the ballpark, in the right ballpark, but a couple of you didn't do it. So you got your points knocked off because you didn't get to the answer. Like I said, there were mostly 2/3 of you were very close to it. There are a couple that were there, and there are 2 or 3 that were not there. They were far. Okay. What is the fundamental job of a cowboy? Explaining erosion and sedimentation terms. This is an easy answer. It was a gift. The fundamental job of a cowboy is to feed his cattle without causing overgrazing. In extreme cases, overgrazing could lead to the destruction of the range to sustain sheet and rill erosion, gully development, and ecosystem failure. That's exactly correct. Okay. That's what the cowboys do. They're supposed to move their cattle around, of course, in pastures that they are allowed to graze. And for that purpose, people that have large herds of cattle, they either have their own range, or they rent areas from other people, or they could even rent from the government. The government owns all the public land in the Western United States managed by the Bureau of Land Management, and they lease it to people that have cattle. And that's where the cowboys are out there grazing their cattle. Fundamental job. Why is bunch grass better able to reduce erosion than an annual weed? That has been explained in the USDA Soil Conservation Service publication 1940, which is titled Influence of Vegetation and Watershed Treatments on Soil Erosion. Not exactly, but that's more or less the title of that publication. And I did believe I said that that was a very important publication, very early publication, that set the Soil Conservation Service in the right course in order to protect our soil and water resources. They call it soil conservation because at the time, right after the Dust Bowl of the middle of the U.S. Prairie land, Oklahoma was the middle of it. Okay, but it was surrounded by the states that are around their area. The Oklahoma Panhandle was the focus of the Dust Bowl in the from 1930 to 1940. And right after the end of 1930, of that decade, the Soil Conservation Service emerged as the agency that was going to take care of our soil and water resources. And they did. They did an excellent job, and they continue to do an excellent job. A job that, by the way, now, of course, for the last 50, 70 years, the US has, but other countries lack an agency that would be national agency fully and completely dedicated to soils. It's interesting. How many people work for the Soil Conservation Service as federal employees? Well, my guess is there would be at least 50,000 because they got offices everywhere and so forth. They're a big agency and a good agency at that. I have had the good fortune and the pleasure of having been associated professionally with many of these people over the years. One of them is my pal, Fred Thurr, who I went to school with Fred in the 70s. And he helped me out, and he believed in me at the time, and he basically facilitated some of the work I did for them. And it was good. It was a good relationship. And just today, I think I should have already mentioned to you that last year, well, first of all, I did the famous Marcus interview. That was 1996, which we already have covered. But then there was another interview in the year 2021. I call it the Marcus Interview Square, because it was the interview of the interview. Because ASCE decided to do an oral history of the curve number document. And they set up a committee and then a subcommittee. The subcommittee is called Oral History of the Curve Number. And they went about identifying people around the country, presumably. I don't know if they did overseas, but around the country that had participated actively in the history of the curve number. So they identified me, and we set up an interview, which took place June 22nd last year. So almost a year and a half now. They set up an interview. They recorded it on video, on Zoom, and so forth. And then, of course, I promptly gathered the video and published it on my site. But then they proceeded to do what they said they were going to do, which is get a transcript so that it could be converted to vector form. You know what I'm talking about. It can be converted to a report. And so they did. Only that it took them a long time. I don't know why. But they released that about a month ago. They released it to me for my review. Because when you do a transcript, there's software that does this. I didn't know that, but there's a piece of software that will take the video and will spit out a PDF of what people have said. But of course, that's imperfect because the software can never 100% guess what the guy that was talking said. So they gave it to me so I could review it and fix it. I guess you could say edit it for propriety, grammar. Was that exactly what you said, and how did you say it? And people, when they talk, they have a tendency to mumble. Everybody does that, and I do that quite a bit, or get into side corners in here. But the side corners was fine. But so we tried to clean it. And interestingly, though, they gave me the job because they said I could do it, and I was glad to do it. But it took me a lot of time. It took me 5 one-hour sessions to do the thing, and that went on the last couple of weeks. Okay, I find 3 weeks. Yeah, it started at the end of last month. So today is the 20th. Yeah, it took 3 weeks, and we just finished it. So obviously we published it. Okay, and now it is there for everybody to see. My involvement with SCS, actually, that's not SCS. That's an ASCE group. It's an American Society of Civil Engineers group, professional committee. So that's the story, and now it's for everybody to see in what used to be in raster form. It is now in vector form. And I actually encourage all of you to go out there and look at it. And if you have not seen the video, which I think I've shown it to you, or I told you where it is, we could not watch the video together because it's a 75-minute video. It's a long video. It would occupy the entire class. But if you want to see it and you don't know where it is, I can definitely show you, perhaps at the end of this class, which I think is going to be short because we're already halfway through. Okay, so bunch grass is a natural grass, better able to reduce erosion than an annual weed. An annual weed comes in when you don't have water. And when you don't have water, the bunch grass dies, and then there's erosion, and everything goes to pit, and then the annual weed is the only thing that comes up. But the annual weed is annual, and therefore doesn't have to have a whole lot of resources, and therefore it doesn't have any roots. So bunch grass is a natural species adapted to a range environment. There's a typo there. Featuring a substantial root structure. In the degraded range, annual weeds take over due to the prevailing insufficient moisture, both as surface water and as subsurface water. The lowering of the water table due to gully development in the vicinity. We have already examined that in this class, as a matter of fact. Under a protracted lack of moisture, the bunch grass dies, and this paves the way for the annual weeds to take over. Once the weeds are established, soil infiltrability is substantially impaired due to the reduced quantity of macropores, which carry moisture readily to the root zone. The net result is increased surface runoff and consequently accelerated erosion. So as you can see, there's an extremely important tie between soil erosion, sedimentation, and vegetation. We need to know that that is the case. This is not just water and dirt. It is water, plants, and water, dirt, and plants. And the plants are very important. Cannot put them aside. Not anymore. We used to. Professor Ponce was a kind of hydrologist, classical hydrologist, which didn't know anything about plants until I went to Brazil in 1979. And I started learning, and I have not stopped since. That's been what? 79. So that's 43 years. Number 7, how does terracing lead to water conservation and erosion control? This is a fantastic method. If you can terrace the slope, it will hold onto the water for obvious reasons. Gravity, you stop the gravity, the action of gravity. And then if you terrace, then it will hold onto the water, and then erosion will be diminished, because if you don't hold onto the water, then you collect the water, and then the water acquires power to start eroding, the stream power. So terracing is an agricultural practice of cultivation along the topographic contour. This maximizes water infiltration, reduces surface runoff, and minimizes sheet and rill erosion. That was a simple answer. Most of you got this correctly, this answer correctly. 8, what type of ecosystem and associated geomorphology would lead to the prevalence of black river waters as opposed to sediment-laden river waters? What is a good example of this situation? I thought that was a gift, and I think most of you, if you did decide to answer this question, answered it correctly. Although the key word in here was the river is black because it has humic substances, humus, which is an intermediate stage of the decomposition of organic matter. It begins as plant litter, eventually decomposing all the way to its elementary constituents. For you to have water, black water, you have to have flat areas, and you have to have a lot of vegetation, and vegetation dies, and the litter does not move because there's no slope to move the litter. It's not like in the Andes where the vegetation dies and rain comes, and then all of the litter is immediately gone. It's in the river, not in the slope anymore, but not in very mild terrain. So the answer to this question is like this: very mild overall terrain slopes, as happen in certain places around the world, particularly in the Brazilian Amazon, produce very little sediment movement. When this type of terrain is extensively covered with humid forests, the decay of organic matter, which we refer to as plant litter, produces humic substances, which owe their characteristic black color to their large content of carbon. The humic substance, humus, is an intermediate stage of the decomposition of organic matter, beginning as plant litter, eventually decomposing all the way to its elementary constituents. So we have in nature matter, which is vegetative matter. The vegetative matter dies and decays, the leaves, stuff like that. The trunks usually don't die, well, they take a long time. But the leaves, every year, there's a certain production of litter, and the litter has to die and go somewhere. And if it can't move, then it stays there. And if there's a lot of water, then it eventually penetrates into the ground. And then at that point, it becomes decomposing. It decomposes from the beginning to the end. It's always decomposing, but it's slow decomposition. And then it's eventually moved. The humic substances are kind of peeled from the flow, and then eventually make it into the rivers. So the rivers are black. Are there any black rivers around the world? Oh yeah, I don't know around the world, but I know of the Amazon. The Amazon has got the Rio Negro, which stands for, in Portuguese, for black river. And the river has black, it's black. It's not brown, light brown, like most other rivers that come from the Andes Mountains. In addition to that, of course, we know that there's rivers there that have clear water or white water. The exact semantics is up for grabs, because it depends on who you follow. But Scioli, who did this, Brazilian gentleman, scientist, who did this classification maybe 40, 50 years ago, came up with the white rivers, the clear rivers, and the black rivers. And we already extensively talked about that. We have it in video, in vector and raster form. And we have, I believe I had you watch that video also. Okay. A good example of this unusual combination of geomorphology and ecology, that's interesting, that we should mention geomorphology. You know how my heart is in geomorphology, because I believe geomorphology, if you understand geomorphology, you are 2/3 way through to understanding just about everything, okay? A good example of this unusual combination of geomorphology and ecology is the Hylian forest of the central northern Amazon basin, which demonstrably features the Rio Negro or Black River. A couple of you mentioned Rio Negro, and a couple of you, many others mentioned the Black Rivers of Brazil, which is fine. There's several, 5 or 6 of them. According to Einstein, what is the main cause of river meandering? That's A. And B is the control of meandering a viable endeavor across the time frames? I put this was kind of a tricky question because you have to focus on across the time frames. Across the time frames is a way of saying forever, okay? So Einstein attributes the cause of river meandering to the effect of the Earth's rotation, which produces a Coriolis force, coupled with the balance of forces in a direction perpendicular to the direction of motion. That's a mouthful, okay? But he did say that, the Coriolis force. The Coriolis force arises because of the Earth's rotation and the fact that that the latitudes have different forces in there. I really honestly can't explain it to you completely. I'm not Einstein, but the Coriolis force is a very well recognized term in planetary physics, I guess you could say, which Einstein knew very well for sure, coupled with a balance of forces in a direction perpendicular to the direction of motion. Now I know that I spend most of my life studying the balance of forces. That's my S curve, the balance of forces. So I know when he said balance of forces in the direction perpendicular, I know exactly what he was talking. I knew that he was talking about something I didn't know because I only did the one-dimensional study. He was talking about that three-dimensional study. Nevertheless, we recognize the meanders are there and they are there to stay. I think I already told you that I have a friend in Colombia who fixes the meanders. Actually, he doesn't fix it. He just kind of provides solutions to live with them, to live or to die with them. And I think I already told you that he had 18 projects in the last 20 years and one of them failed. And when I was there in the year, last time I was in Colombia was, I believe the year 2012. Yeah, roughly. And we went to the field. And looking at what he was doing and the projects and the work that he was doing, it occurred to me, the term of time engineering occurred to me, particularly I had just come fresh out of working at the Salton Sea and the problems that the Salton Sea has. So I basically proclaimed or pronounced at that point my friend Carlos from Colombia to be a time engineer. I said, you're a time engineer. And then either earlier or later, I wrote the paper that you guys have read on what is the concept of time engineering. And time engineering is a concept by which you do engineering, recognizing or not recognizing the fact that time is important in our designs. And it is when you do design a dam, you design it for 100 years, 1,000 years, by 5,000 years. But 5,000 years is not all the time that is in nature. Nature's got a lot more than 5,000 or 10,000 years. And that's one of the issues that has arisen in connection with the formation of the Colorado Desert, you know, and the Colorado Desert, which now is referred to as Imperial Valley, the time engineering. Because at the time, the development of that particular part of California was led or done by a whole bunch of people that were very energetic, very active in making the land produce, which is what they did very well. But they, at the time, didn't realize that they were creating a long-term problem, which, of course, at this point, nobody has paid yet. It's been going on for 4 generations. And no generation, neither of them or all of them had not paid the cost of the creation of the Salton Sea as a result of agriculture in the Imperial Valley. Okay, so is the control of meandering a viable endeavor across the timeframes? And the answer that I have in here is, will prove to be fruitless over the long run. That's what I told my friend. But I told him, I said, the long run could be 100 years, and you don't have 20 more years. I said that half jokingly, but it is true. You know, he's about my age. So our life expectancy, what is a life expectancy? Whatever it is, we're not going to be around too long. So therefore, I said, you don't have to worry too much about it. So risk remains a fundamental issue affecting all engineering practice. There's always a risk. Anything you do has a risk attached to it. That was said, by the way, in no uncertain terms by the great political scientist Machiavelli, whom I have read exhaustively and avidly for the last 20 years or so. I think I read 10 of his books or more than that. 10 of the books about Machiavelli. He's got a few books, but there's more books about Machiavelli than by Machiavelli. And one of the things he said in his writings, in his major writings, was that you can't do something positively or positive without coming out with something negative. It simply cannot be done, he said. And he thought it was so important that he repeated it twice in different ways so that people that read his book would understand that he meant business. You can't do anything positive without coming up with something negative. He said, look around. That's exactly what happened in the development of the Salton Sea. And continues to happen, by the way. You can't store water in a dam without accumulating sediment. And the dam filling up eventually. And then what do? You got to move the sediment out. We have not found economical ways of handling the sediment. Although I should not really say that, because there's been a number of instances in California where the dams were decommissioned and destroyed, and the sediment being held behind the dam was actually taken out and distributed and taken somewhere else. And everybody knows, most everybody, that the sediment is not dirt, it is gold, because it contains the means for our survival. If we didn't have the valleys, we would be dead by now, because the valleys have the nourishment in there that allow us to do agriculture one way or the other, irrigated or non-irrigated, so that we can survive. Without agriculture, we couldn't survive. Okay. Number 10, why is the Atchafalaya poised to eventually prevail over the Mississippi River as the main outlet to the Gulf of Mexico? Who is standing in the way of this not happening in the near future? This is an interesting and very fascinating story, which we have extensively covered, thanks to the video that was narrated by Burt Lancaster. Remember, I don't remember the video. I think it's Goodbye, Louisiana. It has, I posted it on my site on its full version, which is 47 minutes. And then I have an abridged version, I believe it's 8 minutes, which I had you watch in class. We learned about the gentleman from Louisiana. What was his name? Don't remember the name right now. Well-known guy that made a cut to the river, and all he did was accelerate the thirst by the Atchafalaya to take on the Mississippi. That's all he did. But he did that 180 years ago, and the situation is still going, and it hasn't been resolved. So what is the problem here? Well, let's take a look. A large river crossing a continent carries large quantities of sediment and deposits it in its delta. Why is it called a delta? Because it looks like a Greek letter delta. It's like a triangle. It has a base and it has a vertex. As it approaches its mouth in the nearest ocean, the rivers flow to the oceans. If they don't flow to the ocean, they flow into lakes, and then they dry out. That happens all over the world. We have dry areas all over the world. The shape of the delta implies that the sediment is being spread out. Yes, it gets to the delta, and it has to form the delta because the ocean represents a very strong boundary condition. You can't move the ocean. Well, the ocean, you can lose water or can gain water, but that's another story. You can't move the ocean, so the river has to accommodate the ocean and it basically starts moving and spreading the sediment. And then the sediment eventually, after millions of years, forms the delta that every large river has, okay? So the shape of the delta implies that the sediment is being spread out, fanning the river across its delta. The sediment is coming from the uphill, from the upland, and it's moving into the delta and spreading the sediment across the delta, while distributing the sediment more or less equally. Thus, no delta should be fixed to eliminate its lateral movement. That's in retrospect. That's after so many people had written in the late 1900s. There was a book by McPhee, which I read many times. I used to teach that when I was teaching hydrology many years ago. I used to have the students read that book by McPhee. It was good, about the Mississippi, about the problem with the delta of the Mississippi. So I put it in there in bold. No delta should be fixed to eliminate its lateral movement. Why? Because you can't do it. Eventually it'll come back to haunt you. Given enough time, the Atchafalaya will prevail as the master stream taking the flow of the Mississippi to the Gulf of Mexico, albeit only for a few centuries at a time. Right, yeah, the Atchafalaya will take over, and then if it take over 500 centuries later, I'm sorry, 500, yeah, 500, the pendulum of the Mississippi Delta has been estimated variously in 1,000 years. So basically what that means is in 1,000 years, the river should go from left to right of the delta and spreading its sediment evenly as nature had originally intended. But we came in the 1820s, I believe, or it could have been a little earlier, but say in the 1820s. After the, it was after the War of 1812. That's an interesting story. That the British, apparently, I wasn't there, but the British came over and entered into the Mississippi with their ships, and that caused a lot of problems, but eventually they were basically told to go home. And then the United States decided that they were going to do something about the Mississippi being visited by foreign enemies. And about came the Army Corps of Engineers, which Army, they were part of the Army. So the federal government, in their wisdom, they gave the Army Corps the control of the Mississippi because of military reasons. Yeah, military reasons. But then when the Army Corps got a hold of the Mississippi for military reasons, they decided to do navigation, which was okay. Somebody had to do navigation, and don't forget, this was 1820. It was very early in the history of the country, of our country. Then what happened was that, and I wasn't there, but I can surmise what happened, that the Army Corps decided that they could not do navigation without actually doing the flag control because it was related. That's a stretch. You can actually argue that they're not related. Whatever it is, they actually got the job from the federal government to do both navigation and flag control. So that fast forward 120 years, no, 200 years later, and the Army Corps is still in charge of navigation and flag control on the Mississippi. And to do the navigation, you have to do the locks and dams, which they have done. I think there's 40 locks and dams, 44, I think. Locks and dams all the way from St. Paul, Minnesota to Baton Rouge in Louisiana. And I think I wasn't there. Like I said, I'm too young to have been there 200 years ago. They, in their wisdom, they decided that they were going to go ahead and do the levees on the Mississippi. And once they started doing the levees, there was no way back. They had to keep doing the levees. The first levees were 10 feet high. The current levees currently stand at about 35 feet high. They went up from 10 to 35 feet. What is 35 feet? No, I think I'm wrong. I think that's 100 feet high. So it went from 10 feet high to 100 feet high. Yeah, they're huge. Not in all places. Now that particular project, the levee on both sides of the Mississippi, has been considered variously as the largest earthwork project done in the United States. And it is correct. It's about 1,500 to 1,800 miles on both sides of the river. Now we know that there was not quite the sustainable, correct solution. Why? Because in 1993, it proved to us that it didn't work. Why? Because I think I already talked to you about this, that we had two very strong flows. 1973, which almost tore apart the old river control system. And then 1990, then they put the new old river control system in 86. Remember, we talked about this. And in 1993, another big flood came and it menaced or threatened with overflowing the levees. So if they overflow the levees, it's totally out of control. The Army Corps doesn't know what to do, and so forth. So what they decided was fascinating, interesting. They used a tool that is called levee fuse, a fuse on the levee, meaning you can break it here. But they did it so much that actually it's been recorded that they did 200 levee fuses on the Mississippi in 1993. So what was the worth of the levee? I don't know what was the worth of the levee if you had to do 200 levee fuses. Okay, they basically breached the levee in many, many places, strategic places, which were mostly designed to inundate agricultural areas, because they knew in the back of their mind that if they flood the agricultural areas, they're going to get the benefit eventually. Everybody knows that. Everybody knows that. But if you flood the cities, the politicians are going to climb on you. So basically, they defended the cities and they flooded the agriculture. That was in the year 1993. It also happened in the year 2011. And I was there to correctly tell you the story because I lived through it. And I think I already discussed that, but let me repeat it because it's a very good story. That I was there in the year 2011 because there was a levee fuse and I want to go see it and do a video on it, which I do videos, you know. And so one of the gentlemen, engineers, took me to the field because I wanted to see it, and I took a lot of pictures. And there's the issue of the what is it called? The bubbling of the soils on the other side of the levee and so forth. But that's not the issue here. The point that I'm making in here is that I wanted to see the breach. And I went to the breach and stood afar from it, about a couple miles across the lake, because there was a lake out there, part of the river. And I told the gentleman that was taking me there that I wanted to go check it out closely from a close range. I wanted to do a video of the levee. I mean, the levee breach. It actually was not a breach; it's a fuse. It's a different thing. A levee fuse is something that you've blown up. A levee breach is the levee breached in this area, out of control. But the gentleman told me we couldn't go there, doctor. We couldn't go there. Why? Because we're driving a vehicle which is labeled Army Corps of Engineers. It's official Army Corps of Engineers vehicle. I said, so? And he said, oh, those people that live out there, they're mad at us. They're really mad at us because we flooded them. And I don't want anything to happen to you. You're a visitor. You should not be in the business of getting into the melee here. So forget it. We're not going to go there. I don't have authority to take you there. I said, okay, thank you. I'm not a fool. I can risk myself, but I'm not a fool. I'm not going to go there. I don't know these people, and God knows what they could do. They confused me with the engineer from the Army Corps, and that's the end of Professor Ponce. But no, that was not the case. I didn't go there. I didn't see it. I took a video from afar, for like a couple miles, but it was not a close range. So, long story. There's a bug in here. U.S. Army. No, it's U.S. Army. I'll have to fix that. Who is standing in the way of this not happening? The answer is the Army Corps of Engineers. That has been directed by Congress not to let it happen. Yep, you're supposed to not let it happen. When will the fight between the Army Corps of Engineers and the Mississippi River system, when will it be resolved? And the answer is, we don't know. We don't know. McPhee said that. McPhee posed that question in his book. Who's going to win and when? No answer. At this point, we're still there. The Army Corps is still there. So number 11, how and why? Why and how? This question was very specific, but yet many of you did not answer it specifically. You dabble a lot of places, but not in the answer. So some of you lost 2 and 3 points on this one, by the way. Why and how did the flooding of the Salton Sea happen in the winter of 1905-1906? State the hydraulic and hydrologic reasons. There was a reason for it. In 1905, the California Development Company, operator of the Imperial Valley Irrigation, attempted to tap the Colorado River in Baja California, Mexico, for much needed water to irrigate the Imperial Valley. They needed the water. They were going to go out of business if they didn't get the water from the Colorado. And they apparently they couldn't get it directly in the United States. They had to go into Mexico to get it in Mexico. Since the diversion structure was of a temporary nature, because they were going to do a diversion structure, they cautiously waited to carry out the diversion until the winter had passed, because there was a record of at most one flood per winter period. The procedure seemed appropriate at the time because the existing record of 25 years of Colorado River stages did not show more than one winter flood in any year. So they basically played poker in here. They gambled. They said, well, you were engineers. We're going to do the reasonable thing, the rational thing. We're going to look at the record. And the record did not show any more than one flood. So then they said, okay, we're going to wait for the flood. When it happens, we can go. And that's exactly what they did. Unfortunately, that year, the Colorado went on flood stage 3 times. First a little bit, then a little more, and then third, I think it was in March or April, big. It was the Gila River that got misbehaving. That's what they said. That's what what was the name of the guy? The author of the book said in his book. He said, the Gila River misbehaved. The Gila River has a tendency to have, because it's arid area, large peaks in very short period. Unfortunately, that year, the Colorado went on flood stage 3 times. The third time, the river breached the temporary structure, changed direction about 180 degrees, and did about turn, like a U-turn. It did a U-turn and headed north through a steeper downslope. Why did it do a U-turn? Because there was that downslope for the U-turn, in the direction of the U-turn, was much steeper. Oh, I don't know. I can't calculate at least 3 or 4 times, if not more, if not more. And why was that? Because of the geomorphology was in the mouth. And in the mouth of the river, you had to obey the local geomorphology. And you guys know this because I already told you that there's a mound in there. And the mound has a head, or I guess the highest part of the mound is 13 meters. And on south, you get 0. In north, you get to minus 100. Actually, it's minus 90 meters. So you can see the slope to the 90 meters below sea level is a lot bigger. It's about 10 times bigger now that I calculate it. Because if you go north, you go from plus 13 to minus 100. A certain distance, like, I don't know, 100 miles. And if you go down south, it is from 13 to 0. So that is only 13 instead of 113. So that's about 10 times. Yep. So the Colorado wanted to go, all rivers want to go in the direction of the steepest gradient. That we know for a fact. Okay. So that's what happened. The third time, the river breached the temporary structure, changed direction 180 degrees, and headed north through a steeper downslope towards the Salton Basin Depression, filling it and creating the Salton Sea. Why was there a depression there? Because that depression was part of the sea. Long time, millions of years ago, it was part of the sea. You don't tell the sea what it's supposed to do. It was a depression. The depression originated in many ways because of the mound that was created at the local delta of the Mississippi. And why was all this thing caused? I mean, what's the underlying truism to this whole thing that we're discussing at this point? The answer is geomorphology. It was geomorphology, the whole thing from the beginning. Okay. Number 12, what is hungry water? Under what circumstances does it occur? And how can it be controlled? The issue is how can it be controlled? It's a fascinating thing for engineering. A, the phenomenon of hungry water is produced when a certain flow is forced to drop the sediment it normally carries. A flow is always going to normally carry a certain amount of sediment. That is called by Einstein first as sediment load. The sediment load. Einstein in 1950 developed a procedure, a theoretical concept of how to calculate the bed load of a river. As a matter of fact, he called his work the bed load function for sediment transportation. And we are in the second part of the course, which starts next week, we're going to start getting into that subject. Okay, so produced when a certain flow is forced to drop the sediment it normally carries. as it continues to flow downstream, this hungry flow will naturally entrain the sediment it wants to carry. But note naturally, because if it's in a natural surrounding, it will entrain for sure, as it happened in the Aguaje de la Tuna and in other places, documented by none other than Emory W. Lane, when he showed New Mexico, remember the New Mexico dam that had eroded about 10 feet? He showed a man in there, and the level was above this man's head. Okay, this hungry water will naturally entrain the sediment it wants to carry, its sediment load, either from the channel bottom or from the channel banks, because it is producing shear on both. The shear is on both bottom and the banks. Now, this issue of shear is interesting because what is shear? Shear is a force, you know from your mechanics, shear is a force that is not normal. The opposite of shear is the normal flow and shear force, yeah, right? And they both, in mechanics, they both have this descriptions and expressions to calculate the normal flow, the normal pressure and the shear pressure. The shear force, which leads to the shear pressure, okay? So in this case, there is shear on the bottom, which is called degradation. But if you have a lot of flow, there's also shear on the sides, which is called bank caving. That's the name of it. It's not called degradation. In this case, it's called bank caving. Do rivers bank cave? Oh boy, of course they do. If you have a huge flood, the flood will tend, the higher the flood, the more sediment it will like to pick up. It will try and will pick up if allowed to. So it will pick up from the bottom first, and then it was not happy. It will continue. Not happy meaning it's not getting enough from the bottom because there's limits. And then it get it from the sides. A case in point. 3 or 4 years ago, actually it was in 2017. 2017, as you guys know very well, it was an El Nino year. The El Nino sequence, I know it very well, 1973. No, excuse me, 1983. There was a 1993. There was a 1998. And I believe that was the end of that series. And then in 2017, it hit us with rage. The entire northern coast of Peru was flooded from the zero latitude, which is the encounter with Ecuador, from there all the way to Lima, Peru, where your professor was. I'm originally from Lima, Peru. Okay, so it hit all the way to Lima, Peru, for a couple of months or something like that. Floods all over, floods galore all over. Okay, and then the Rimak River, which crosses Lima, Peru, is the main river in Lima, Peru. There's 3 rivers in the north, center, and south. But the one that goes through the middle of downtown is called Rimak River. Okay, R-I-M-A-C. Okay, it's a local word, Quechua language. At any rate, the point is that that there was a bridge out there. And fortunately, it was a pedestrian bridge that the city had put in there a year before to allow people to go from one side of the river to the other side. It was a beautiful river, actually. And it was, I believe it was in cantilever, or in other words, it had only one area where it was set in there, in one area, okay? So it was fine for about a year. Then after a year, they had the big flood. The Rimak came over, charged tremendously with a lot of force. And guess what? It peeled off the base of the support. The base of the support was this huge block of concrete, but it was encased in the soil. It was huge, but it was encased in the soil. So the question is, when was that block of concrete, when was it going to fall off its base? And within the flood, I think it was February, I'm not sure, for February or March of the year 2017, which was the peak of the effects on the entire northern coast of Peru, it failed. As a matter of fact, I have a movie. There's a movie on the web. You know, there's everything on the web nowadays. I have a video that shows the exact moment of how and when the bridge, the pedestrian bridge that had been built a year before in Lima, Peru, failed. Why did it fail? Because the designers failed to the river failed because the designers failed to consider the effect of the river on the sides. In other words, the bank erosion was really not considered, the possibility of bank erosion. So there's always risk. Now, in their defense, I would say that must have been a very, I didn't do the numbers, I'm not privy to the numbers. That must have been a very high frequency, like I said, 100 years, 200, 500 years, I don't know the numbers. All I know is that the pedestrian bridge succumbed. I mean, it failed. It came down like a sack of potatoes, you know, boom, came down, completely gone. 2017 in Lima, Peru. Hungry water. Hungry water typically occurs downstream of an impoundment, either natural, but more typically artificial, such as a water reservoir or a sediment detention basin. And we know that from the experience in Tijuana in the year, when was it? Forget, I totally blanked out. 2000 and, no, it was 1993. 1993, exactly. How can it be controlled? Well, here is interesting. That's my answer to this is the only way to control the occurrence of hungry water is to minimize the use of artificial impoundments. But this is a high call because we need the artificial impoundments. What we shouldn't be doing is what they did in Tijuana. We tried to hold on to the sediment, but not to the water. That doesn't work. That doesn't work. That's our take on it. That doesn't work. It's been proven it doesn't work. And we know all the knowledge that Lane developed in the middle 1950s says that you can't do that because it won't work. You'll waste the money. You try to do something and it went down the drain. Okay, so with that, then I am completed here. I'm finished here, and what I'm going to do now at the end of this lecture is to go back and show you the interview in case you have not seen it. Just a minute, bear with me for a second. Actually, I'm just going to show you well, we just came up with the vector version. Just came up with it. It was just posted a couple of days ago. You see that? Okay, I think we'll try it now. So now we're going to share this, share. Okay, now can you see the yellow page? Can you see the yellow page, Callum? You guys are not there. Juan?
Yes, sir, we can see the yellow page. Sorry,
Okay.
Coco Melon in the background.
Okay, so link 42074, right there on the yellow page. It says transcript of curve number oral history interview, Miguel Ponce. That's me, Victor Miguel Ponce. Okay, so this is the transcript of the interview of the video. So please take a look at this transcript because it is important. Although I should say that it is hydrology, it is not sedimentation engineering. But for those of you that are interested just in learning a little more of the history of how this thing developed, I, having played a large role because of my Marcus interview in the history, I think you'll be interested in finding out what was my role and how did I do it? How was I able to do this nobody had ever done? Thank you very much. So I will see you next Tuesday. Bye-bye.